Hey, I'm Chris.
And I'm Sean, and day one ended abruptly. A lot of games don't do that structurally.
Yeah.
You sort of get to an end point, you touch a flag, or you continue on infinitely with no cuts.
Right.
Cuts are very rare in games that have sort of a...
First-person games especially.
Yeah.
The idea for that came from the movie Dallas Buyers Club.
So interesting.
I know.
to
I
me.
remember so specifically seeing the first time that movie cuts to a day title card where you learn that the Matthew McConaughey character has diagnosed with AIDS and essentially given 30 days to live. And then it cuts and it says day one. And it was that was like a gut punch when you see that because of what it implies. And I was like, oh man, our game is set in basically a limited amount of time. And there's like this tense thing that happens that makes it, it's not as though there's like a specific date that's coming up, but there is like tension now that exists. Also, we had to figure out just how to get around the fact that we had a big open world and needed to tell a linear story. And so I just came in the next day and pitched that idea based on that movie.
And we all just thought it was like stylish and interesting and solved so many problems, so we did it.
Ended up creating a lot more problems, but I think it worked overall.
Yeah, it was great.
Hey, it's Ollie again.
And Jake.
Hey, Jake.
So I feel that we're right now in close proximity to Forrest Burns.
I think the idea for Burns came around when we realized that Smokey the Bear was not a public domain figure, and we realized, but also something that people associate really closely, the idea of a mascot with wilderness parks.
Right. So what if we created something far worse than Smokey the Bear?
What if we made something horrifying and strange? I mean, the original idea was that as the game kind of built up, you'd find these Forrest Burns posters that would get gradually more sinister and be this sort of like externalization of Henry's inner paranoia sort of creeping in. But
that did not happen.
We didn't do that. We just made a wacky character and stuck him in the game.
I think there's one of the Forrest Burns posters survives in a couple places. Like Delilah's Tower at the end has the Forrest Burns can dig it poster. But the one that says "snuff it out" with him holding a match
does not appear in the game.
The face of a child. Yeah, it's not there.
No, that's out.
Yeah, I know. Even up until the moment that Forrest Burns went into the game, I feel like there was a hesitance from the team to include him in the game. But
I went and just put him in.
you rogue modeled the Forrest Burns stand-up, and then right before the GDC demo, I put him on the back of the outhouse.
Yes.
And then it turns out that he was really fun. Fun Forrest Burns fact, for a while you could use him as a physics object, and then we've discovered that you could surf Forrest Burns and use him to get to inaccessible areas. So you can no longer do that, unfortunately.
That's much to my chagrin.
Yeah, surf Burns down the shale slide, not allowed. Anyway, that's him. Enjoy him. Yep. Use him well.
Hey, it's Chris again.
And Sean.
Hey. So the conversation that you may be hearing or may be coming up soon has Delilah taking a call from another lookout. Unbeknownst to her, Henry can hear this all happening. And when she finishes that call, you as the player can choose to call her on it or not call her on it. And that was a very interesting piece of writing and design, I think.
Yeah, I really loved the idea we had here, and I love the way it is performed, but I feel like I especially would add something to it if I were to go back into the game and noodle around. This is a kind of a confusing call for people, and I'm sure if it was for you, you'll understand why, which is that people get really hung up on the fact that Delilah takes this mysterious call, and then it's never sort of like overtly explained that she's just doing her job. She's just literally just talking to someone else. And the lens through which you hear it is 100% just Henry's paranoia. But I feel like that could have been underscored here way more had I let you, the player, find a nuanced middle ground and sort of pry at her about what that call was without freaking out. If you call her on it, Henry gets very, very defensive. And while I think that goes to illustrate the fact that Henry doesn't have a lot of capacity for nuance and middle ground because he's so damaged and bummed to be in the situation he's in, I feel like he kind of did players a disservice by not letting them feel out the relationship and a potential mystery early on.
I think that dated from an earlier revision of the game in which we were barreling towards more of a hard break between Henry and Delilah.
Yes.
And this was maybe just one thing that didn't quite get that last tweak.
Yeah. But I still like the scene, nevertheless.
Yeah.
Hi, Ollie.
Hi, Sean.
It's nice that we're doing a tape together.
I know. Is this the first one?
It's our first and only one.
Oh, that's a shame.
I feel like we've done so much together not on tape, at least not recorded in a way that you know about.
Okay.
And here we are talking about Hawk's Rest.
Hawk's Rest.
You concepted this area quite a
Yeah,
bit.
the idea was that it would seem from the outside a sort of innocuous little house on the edge of a cliff, much like your own lookout, but when you open the door, you get the surprise that it's been burnt away and you just see a vista and a sort of rush of wind as you open that door, and I thought that would be a really fun reveal for the player.
Yeah, and I sort of screwed it up when I first wrote this scene because all of these sort of Hawk's Rest dialogue and all the stuff about Raccoon Carter was as you were walking up the hill, you could report the cabin, which was a lookout tower at the top of the hill, and then get into this story about its former inhabitant as you were approaching it, and then it sort of buried the moment in a way. So we took all that stuff out, and I hacked in very inelegantly, I think, that Delilah just doesn't answer you when you ask her about what the house at the top of the hill is, and then you get to experience it alone before getting the story about Raccoon Carter, and I'm really happy with the way that worked out. Also,
There's a secret.
but the raccoon that lives in the stove that you may or may not know about is only there on certain days because of a myriad of design reasons. But if you're here on any day that isn't day 2 and you open that stove, there's a little
Spoilers.
critter in there. And that was animated by James, textured by Ollie, drawn by Ollie. I really like that raccoon, Oliver.
Thanks, Sean.
You did a very nice job on that raccoon. Also, you did a very nice job on the rest of the game, and I'm only going to tell you that on the Hawk's Rest tape. I'm actually going to edit this out. I don't want anyone hearing me ever compliment you
Fantastic.
in the record, but because it's our only tape together. But yeah, I really love the way this area came together.
It's lovely. Lovely the way it is. Very nice. Well done.
Hey, it's Jake again.
And Mark's here.
So, is there anything style-wise that you had to consider on this game as opposed to doing work in I don't know, a lot of the other stuff you've done is probably more AAA in scope.
Yeah, I mean, my previous work, I've done a lot more just ridiculous, over-the-top Hollywood-type blood squibs and explosions and laser beams and that kind of jazz. So it was neat to just sort of stop and think about what the relevant effects to walking around a national park would be.
Right.
Just sort of ambient, natural, secondary motion that you would want in the world without it being obnoxiously overpowered as most things you would do for a AAA action game.
You know, the entire world looks hazy and covered in smoke as the fire gets closer and closer. And obviously we couldn't just fill the entire world with smoke because everyone's graphics card would melt and it would also look like a big pile of garbage. So it seems like you and Paolo, who did a lot of the sort of programming side of this, ended up inventing this thing that the team called the Henry's Smoke Barfer, which
I do think Nels actually coined that one, but yeah,
it was probably Nels.
Yeah, it's a very Nels thing to say.
Yeah, Henry at this point in the game is wandering around with basically a pigpen cloud around him. When you see the sparks flying around on day 79 or the sort of lingering haze on days 77 and 78, that's actually just Henry's body emitting those, then leaving them behind in a trail.
I made up a group of emitters that rotate around the watchtower that, if you look real closely, you could probably make it out, but it gives that sort of feeling of it's super intensely smoky outside without having
you're in the middle of this big swirling storm, but actually it's just, 6 feet of smoke spinning around the outside of the building.
Yeah, pretty much.
Hey, Chris again.
And Sean.
Hey, if you saw the second trailer for Firewatch, there's a moment that takes place here where Delilah points out that there's someone in Henry's tower. Henry points out that he's not there. Camera swings back to the tower, and it's a big dramatic ending. Of course, that moment happens in a completely different part of the map in the actual game and has totally unrelated to this moment that you're now experiencing.
And this was a trailer that we had debuted with Sony at E3, so we knew we had a big audience and that a lot of people were going to see it. It's really, really challenging. I mean, you all know, because everyone goes to movies, what it's like to watch a trailer for a movie that you're excited about and maybe have already decided to see and then be shown too much stuff.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, a movie either has the ability to or sort of the chutzpah to just show you a scene that hit the cutting room floor
Mhm.
or an alternate version of something that gets you feeling the way you should feel and excited for the movie as presented, but doesn't spoil it for you. And I think I'm really happy that we ended up doing that. I think it's good. Like, you're not lying. It's not like we showed you a mechanic
Right.
that you can't do or anything like that.
I think that we basically had to find a way to accurately convey the type of tension and mood of the game without spoiling it. And so we basically ended up just writing those trailers to fit. I think it worked.
I'm happy with them.
Hi, it's Ben.
Oh, it's Jake. Hey, Ben. So let's talk about Henry's camera, or I guess more specifically, the Goodwin family camera. We liked the idea of Brian and his dad bringing one of those little cardboard cameras out with them, and we had thought at various points in production, maybe we should cut taking photos because it's really complicated. Maybe you should just see the ones at the end in the credits and be shocked by the Goodwin family.
When I joined the project, I actually was super excited about this feature. I liked the idea of having the camera have a little bit of a real world like feel to it. People seemed to like when you showed an animated GIF of it on Twitter. People went crazy like remembering these things.
Especially once the idea was proposed that on PC you could print out your photos or you could upload them to the internet and get them developed, which is the thing that we do.
Yeah, the photos that we take are actually secretly 5 megapixel, like first generation digital camera quality photos, but just good enough that if you print them out, they look okay.
Yeah, like once we went all in on that as a concept, it seemed like having the camera in the game was like an essential no-brainer. And then we went all in on making it work like a real camera. Like we really wanted, you'll have a fixed number of shots you can take. Every time you take a picture, Henry has to wind the camera by hand.
And some players like ignore it and don't take pictures. They'll take like the 2 that Delilah tells you to, and then the end credits will play and they'll see 2 pictures and maybe have a little feeling of loss that they didn't participate in that feature.
Yeah, or people who get super bummed because they get really into the mystery and take pictures of like strange machines and ripped up campsites and a dead Brian Goodwin, and then get to the end credit sequence and go, "Oh, that was me."
Yeah, they only see the sad things.
I
Those
like
people
that.
win.
Depending on how much you use the camera and what you choose to take a picture of, you end up getting a different story at the end of the game. That's the thing that I think worked out the best with the camera and made me the happiest that we actually went all out on building this stupid thing.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Hey, Chris here.
And Patrick.
Hey, Patrick. So at this point in the game, we're starting off on the search for the teens. One big challenge we frequently had on Firewatch was figuring out how to guide players when the person giving you your current objective doesn't actually know where to send you. Delilah knows you need to find the teens, but neither of you have any idea where to start.
And in this case, we'd used telephone poles to get you up to Beartooth Point, and we're now using some beer cans to sort of lead you in the general direction away from that. Of course, we rapidly saw that these teens were drinking a truly ludicrous number of beers in one walk.
I think you and I both placed quite a few of these beer cans, probably you even more than I.
Yep.
It started to sort of strain credulity.
Right, which is why I think we had to add that case at the end just to make it plausible that there are something like 30 cans out there.
Right.
Yeah.
Probably the best tool we ended up coming up with for this, which was the smoke plume,
Right.
was because we were getting increasingly uncomfortable with stretching fiction so far to the point of adding this many like Hansel and Gretel
That's right.
beer cans.
That's right. And but even then, the smoke plume was not enough. Many players didn't notice it or weren't looking up, which we know is a common game design problem. And that's when we started adding dialogue where Henry could call into Delilah and basically say, "Where do you have any ideas? I'm lost. I still can't find them." Kind of mirroring what we saw in playtesting where people did get lost and got frustrated.
Right.
Ultimately, when that fell down,
Eventually, if you have not noticed anything, you haven't asked Delilah about any of this stuff, she will just call you and say, "Hey, I see some smoke. Maybe that's where you should go."
right. And that pretty well sews it up.
The sort of full court press of all of those things. I think most players eventually find their way to the teens. I mean, we figured it was okay for players to get lost a little bit. I mean, that is the point of this. You are supposed to be on an aimless search a little bit on this mission. But, you know, I think with all of the different tools we added in, most players eventually feel like they're actually on some kind of trail.
I mean, I suggested an omniscient satellite AI that could contact you and tell you exactly where to go, but that was shot down.
It was a late cut.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Will, and I was the gameplay and systems programmer on Firewatch.
And I'm James, and I was the animator on Firewatch.
And we're here to talk about climbing and mantling today.
We had a bunch of stuff that essentially was more point-to-point interactive stuff, where you sort of like look to the rock you wanted to put your hand on and click on it, and you'd kind of do that. A lot of the platforming-y type stuff just got pared down because as you make the game, you realize what game you're making, and it's not really about being an athletic climbing person. It just kind of like made the game slower when you were trying to get to the next conversation. Mostly what the climbing stuff ended up being useful for in like game design terms was characterization. So some of the mantles do a decent job of getting across that Henry is kind of a lumbering, slightly heavier person, as we sort of like force you to watch Henry kind of slug over an edge rather than being a nimble mirror's edgy person.
We also use it a lot of times to break up sightlines so that you get a good vista as you come up over a mantle, like when you see the man with the flashlight for the first time, or kind of see the burned forest.
In the cave, sometimes we use the camera animation on mantles to hide a sort of teleport to a different part of the cave, which was pretty useful actually, so that was quite good.
The reason that it all got pared down is we, didn't want you to ever fall off the cliff, didn't want you to back down them. Like, nobody ever wanted to climb back up those twice, so we just made them simpler and simpler and simpler until eventually getting to you just hit the button and climb all the way up.
One of the earliest conversations I had with Jake, he just sort of casually mentioned, oh, and we're thinking that you can't die in this game, and which now seems like the most obvious design decision ever for Firewatch, but I'd only been making games before then where it's like, and then you have your character can die and you respawn and like traditional video game stuff, and the idea suddenly of like, oh, like how do you make content that still feels like I'm climbing over stuff and I'm doing things, but with absolutely no risk. And I remember at the very beginning being like, oh god, is that going to be a huge problem? Of course now, if you ever saw Henry fall to his death in the game, it would be ludicrous and ruin the moment completely.
Absolutely.
But Firewatch 2 is going to have lots and lots of falling to your death, obviously.
Oh, hey, this is Ben again, and I'm here with Paolo.
Hello, I'm Paolo. I was the graphics programmer on Firewatch.
So we're here to talk a little bit about the time of day system that the game uses and the skybox stuff. You're in an area where there's a weird device that you can use to step and mess around with those while we talk.
As you can see around you right now, you can walk on the different parts there and you'll see the weather changing. So immediately when we started working on Firewatch, there were a couple of important points. We had to have a dynamic time of day. So at any point, people could trigger changing the sky, changing the fog, changing each individual component independently. At the same time, this has all sorts of technical implications, but the most important are, okay, how do we represent all this information? Games have many ways of baking data, which means that you sort of gather the lighting information in a scene and then you save it into memory, which is usually a texture or other data structures, to then use it in real time. Now, the problem with that was that we had a lot of different permutations and we wanted them to change in real time. And also, we didn't know ahead of time how many we were going to have. So we tried to go with a fully dynamic solution. In this case, what dynamic means is just that as you walk around, you'll see the sun moving around, the sky color changing, the fog color changing, and the shadows moving. So all those components are always rendered every frame, and there's no information that is stored anywhere.
So what pieces make up the sky again?
The sky, we tried first an approach of representing sort of a simplified version of the scattering equation and seeing what that would look like. And it was looking good in the game, but it was still very difficult to author. And since Ollie, as the art director, is absolutely talented with colors, at some point we just sat down and we sort of worked together and said, okay, imagine that you could just paint the sky in Photoshop and think about how that would work in the game. It might just magically work. And by doing that, we basically dissected his process of assembling just a painted sky in Photoshop, and we created a shader, which are basically programs that run on the GPU to render things, that suited his exact style. So really the sky is just a series of gradients that blend into each other with a couple of controls to change curves and attenuations between them. So as you walk around, you'll be able to see how both the sky changes and then the fog adapts to the same color and the sun moves in the right direction. And then there were just a couple of numbers to make sure that like the brightness around the sun would be higher so that it would still sort of represent and give the feeling of what the sky and how the sky behaves.
And this like gave Ollie the ability to test some things very quickly.
Exactly. Having immediate feedback for filling a world that was as big as Firewatch, especially for the sort of limited team size that we had, was absolutely important. Like we had to have a way so that artists would make something quickly, have an idea of what it would look in the game, and knowing that it was pretty close to what we were going to ship.
Yep. Hey, Jane.
Hi, Jake. Let's talk about how I almost killed you over this canyon crossing.
Why would anyone have any objection to something in a game as lovely as this area?
So originally, when we first built this whole canyon, you can only walk through the bottom where the creek is.
It looks really lovely when you're walking along the bottom looking up.
And you cannot get close to anything.
You can just imagine what the top of the canyon looks like, and you don't ever have to see it or make it.
Basically, there was nothing up here.
But what if, think about this though, what if you could walk across the top of it and look down, and then we built all of that too?
I just remember the day when you mocked this out in a paper map and just gingerly just showed it to me. And then I looked at it and I was like,
what's that line? What's that line doing going over there?
No way, Jake.
There was no way I was going to win that. I mean, I ended up just building a lot of it myself to try.
And I think you were like, okay, how about this other thing? I was like, okay, this other thing is fine, but this is definitely not happening.
I just secretly built a million walls and trees and did every single thing that I possibly could to make it so
but
you would look at it.
You did a good job though, because the thing I was really worried about was when you're up there, you end up seeing basically the whole length of the canyon and then also all the way to basically towards Delilah's tower, which means it's
all the way through the Beartooth Point.
It would be
area,
way too much game to try to draw.
Mule Point.
So that was the original sort of
It was a lot of very careful then you go around this turn and then you secretly drop down 3 feet and a bunch of huge trees come up. I was very happy that we were able to get the canyon crossing in because it's one of the few places where I think you do a total figure 8 over yourself.
It was nice that you managed to problem solve all the sight line areas before I lose my mind.
Thanks for not killing me. I'm alive to be on this commentary track.
Hello, this is Jane again.
And Chris.
And we are now by the lake. And you might be noticing that there's some really sweet duck sounds by the lake.
Jane bugged me for duck sounds for months. Actually, one of the oldest, we track our tasks on the game with a task tracker or a bug tracker. So you rank them all by priority. And I think the lowest or second lowest priority thing on my list for months was duck sounds for Jane. And that just sat there until I think one day I just didn't have a lot to do. And I was like, you know what? I'm doing it. I'm bumping the duck sounds up the chain. I think I just looked on the internet for public domain duck noises.
Yeah, I think you were actually wondering what kind of ducks there would be too. You were
I
very
looked it
thorough.
up. I researched it, and I think I was mainly there. I think I fudged it a little bit because I didn't want it to just be the same I wanted there to be a variety so it didn't get annoying if you hung out there for a while.
It's not just ducks, it's waterfowl.
Yeah,
of all kinds.
So I branched out a bit, but we got them in.
Yay!
Thanks for bugging me about the duck sounds.
Yeah, it won't be a real lake without duck sounds.
Exactly.
Hi, this is Will.
And this is James again.
We're talking about the rope right now. You should be one nearby.
Yeah, the rope was the very, very first thing I ever did on the entire game. It kind of seeped into being quite an important part of the world layout. We sort of had this whole Metroidvania items thing, and the rope was very much our first, that's the rockets that let you get through the door in Metroid. It was such an early flag we planted in the ground for ourselves. So, yeah, there were lots of technical things, weren't there?
All of the rope climbs are different. All the rope slides are different. Minorly different, but different enough. So the rope had to be physically simulated. It couldn't be just a pre-canned animation. In order to get that to work, took a ton of time, lots of iterations. In the end, I had to basically make Henry's hand a gravity well whenever he's on the rope, and then grab the nearest parts of the rope and reskin them to bones that I was just making out of math around Henry's hand and belt. So his like left hand, right hand, and belt are all take over as fake bones, and we reskin the rope every frame to get that to match up perfectly. And if you look real close at the rope, you can see sort of a little bit in front of his hands, the texture on it. The tiling changes and kind of squishes and stretches and squishes and stretches as you go down. And that's because the rope position doesn't naturally always like line up with even spacing when I swap in those fake bones.
Yeah, the rope is one of the best examples if you were to like zoom the camera out and look at what's going on, where like I'm sort of animating by the seat of my pants and like just keeping his hands in the perfect position so that that transition between the physics rope and the skinning version of the rope, doesn't blend too strangely. And it's probably the set of animations in the game that has the most versions made. There's probably like 10 different versions of climbing down. There used to be things where your hands would swap in front of you, picking the rope from one to the other, and obviously that is unbelievably ridiculously complicated once we had a physical rope. And
nice thing is you can get on it from anywhere and at any time, and it all works. So it was worth it in the end, but quite a bit of effort.
Hi, this is Ben again, and I'm here with Paolo.
Hello.
We're going to talk about Stylistic Fog and some of the other effects in the game.
For the Stylistic Fog, we basically use the same approach that we use for the other rendering components and technologies of Firewatch, which was how do we get something that allows Ollie and Jane to really just be directive and paint colors and information like they want into a 3D world. So the only challenge that was there really was how do we translate sort of a 3D scene that has depth into it into layers of colors, and immediately we came up with this technique of using a one-dimensional texture that is applied. You can imagine that the image it's a sort of a rectangular image goes from left to right. Imagine that left is the color that is closer to the player and right is the color that is in the distance. So in that way, you are basically able to paint color in the depth of the world, and that really gave Jane and Ollie the control they needed to make the Firewatch colors as beautiful as they are.
Yeah, it really matches a lot of Ollie's original like poster and previs work for the game.
Yeah.
And that technique is used a lot in like film. In film, they wouldn't even just use one texture. Sometimes they'll use like hundreds of these strips to layer out an entire scene. But can't do that in a video game because we got to render it a lot of frames per second on bad computers sometimes.
Yeah, and for that, like for the color correction specifically, we used the plugin that was actually available in the Unity Asset Store, and it just worked right off the bat for us. It gave us sort of the real-time tweaking that we needed, and thanks to that, we saved some development time, which was really precious.
Yeah, that was the amplify color if you're really wanting to make your own Firewatch. And in an area like this, Aspen Grove, you can see all those effects coming together. You see we have God rays coming from the sun. We have depth of field. If you pick up an object to blur out the world, you can see all the different colors that Ollie's manipulating beyond just like what the sky and light would provide.
Yeah, awesome.
Hi, this is Ollie again.
And this is Syndra. I worked as a character artist.
One of the most important things about this game, from our point of view, was to try and get the player to kind of inhabit this character, Henry. And a big part of that was his character design. We wanted him to be a little different to the regular kind of character you might expect from this kind of game. He's a little older, a little more portly, and we wanted to make sure that, when you look down, you can see your body and you really like feel as if you are playing this character. And to do that, I designed him from the point of view of like trying to make him feel like an older man in terms of the way he moved and he looked. We used a lot of, reference for this, particularly comedian Louis C.K. was one that we
I had like a mood board that I made that's just essentially just like a collage of Louis C.K. and there was also a fair bit of like Wreck-It Ralph and like the Heavy from Team Fortress, sort of like these heavy sort of slow moving characters. It's actually when I was modeling, I would actually put like a camera in Henry's head so I could look down at his body, which is like, I think most of the design characters for third-person games and mobile and stuff like that, I was not used to designing anything from that perspective. The initial model I sent you guys was pretty much just a bunch of primitives mashed together, like really rough, sort of like early Dreamcast 3D kind of looking stuff, just to get like a feel for the just the proportions and to give James something to rig, so he could just get something moving and kind of get a preview of the motions, because you don't need like a fully formed, highly detailed 3D model to just do animation. So actually nailing that stuff on early on was really important, I think.
One of the biggest focuses was the hands, because those are the things that the player sees the most, and they're the most sort of expressive, Henry. So we wanted to make sure that the shapes were really simple and bold and evocative in order to allow James, our animator, kind of give him the best material to work with and portray the character through those motions.
Yeah, they're practically the main character.
Hey, it's Sean.
And Chris. Hey, Sean.
So we are at the teens camp that has been destroyed, ransacked, rummaged, torn apart.
Yeah.
And I know you had some confusion over this, Chris.
I did. I didn't realize I had confusion. So I was the person who did all the gameplay, wiring, logic, hookup stuff for this scene. And the entire time I was doing it, I, for some reason, was under the mistaken impression that it was a bear that destroyed this camp. I, for some reason, had convinced myself that, oh, Goodwin was sort of involved in framing Henry for teen stuff, but also just separately and coincidentally, a bear just like blasted through here and tore up the tent. And I think I didn't realize until the game was almost done that that was not the case.
And I think that's one of the challenges of making a game like this, and where or telling a story that doesn't explicitly call out why everything is happening. I think me personally, and I think you agree with me, Chris, because we talk about movies and stories a lot, I really find it obnoxious when a story goes out of its way to explain everything and handhold you through the plot of the story. Ultimately, you, the player, may have thought it doesn't really matter to you whether it was a Goodwin or a bear, because it's doing all the things on an emotional level that it needs to do as a scene, which is stress you out, realize there's danger, and create the fact that the teens feel like it was you. Like, you just know it's not you. So that's
Right.
what works here.
Like, or as you may have correctly intuited what happened, and that's also good.
Yeah. Goodwin sets out to cause you distress and frame you for acts of violence such as this.
By inflaming the already existing tension between you and these teens.
Exactly right. Because he just wants you out of here. You entered that cave on your first day, and he knows what's in the bottom of it, and
doesn't want you to.
Yeah, trips a trigger for him.
Yeah.
But yeah.
All right.